Hello candidates, good afternoon. This is Mr. Arnaito Noe reaching you once again from Good Times Infant School, Kawala. You are most welcome to yet another episode of SST, of which I'm going to take you through and to build on what Mr. Otim taught you in the last lesson. But to begin with, I want to give you a simple exercise, and that is spelling exercise. Get your books and write the following words. 1, ideology. 1, ideology. Then 2, imprisonment. Imprisonment. 3, racial segregation. Racial segregation. Then 4, human rights. 4, human rights. Then 5, neo-colonialism. Candidates, let us mark ourselves, and the correct spelling, look at the screen. And I said number 1 is ideology, and candidates, ideology simply means the opinions or the ideas of people. Then number 2, I said imprisonment, and imprisonment simply means the state of being in prison. The state of being in prison, that is imprisonment. Then number 3, I said racial segregation, and that simply means the separating of people according to their colors, or what we call racism. Then number 4, human rights, and that one simply means the freedoms that people or every person is entitled to. Then lastly is neo-colonialism, and that one simply means the indirect control of a country which is weaker by a superior country. But it seems to be independent, but it has not got independent. It got independent, but it is still under the leadership of foreigners, but indirectly. Today we are going to look at the reasons why Pan-Africanism had little impact on African continent before 1945. I said we are going to look at the reasons why Pan-Africanism had little impact on African continent before 1945. So in other words, why did it have less effect before 1945? And these are the reasons. Candidates, reason 1, it was looked as a movement for intellectuals. In other words, people did not take it so serious. They only considered it to be for only those people who had a lot of kind of reasoning, a lot of kind of serious study, so they did not have that kind of consideration. That is one of the reasons why it never had a lot of or a big impact. A lot of impact or a big impact. Then 2, Africans were still politically backward. They did not understand issues to do with politics, so they couldn't imagine the implication of Pan-Africanism in their continent. Then 3, difficulty in language. So because Pan-Africanism collected all members, so long as they were Africans, they were from different countries and they spoke different languages because they were of different ethnicity. So that one was a challenge. It made communication so difficult to understand each other. Then another point is ideological differences by some leaders. For example, these Pan-Africans were from different countries and they had different opinions. So because each of them could think differently, then that one had to make it difficult for some of its movement to go on. So it had less impact, and because of that kind of language problem. Then we have another point as difficulty in transport. Because the roads were not yet developed by then in Africa, the railways were not developed in Africa, and other things that could facilitate transport by then in Africa were so poor. So it was difficult for these people to link up to maybe one center where they could merge and have matters to discuss as regards Pan-Africanism because of poor transport system or poor transport network. So it was difficult for them to meet. Then the early Pan-Africans, Congolenses, were not held in Africa because we say this could be held in London, others in Manchester, and that one made it difficult for those people who are living in Africa to know about such conferences or to have access to such conferences that would bring those people together and discuss matters to do with freeing their countries from colonial rule. Then most Africans thought that the movement was meant for blacks in Africa. That's why some of those Africans living in European countries did not take it so serious. They thought that that movement was meant for those people who were living in Africa. Let us now go to problems faced by Pan-Africans or obstacles they encountered during Pan-Africanism or during the struggle for freeing their countries. And they had the following challenges or the following problems. One, lack of unity among African leaders. You know, if there is no unity or if those people are not together, it is always a challenge for them to see how best they can solve the problem. Two, shortage of funds. They lacked money. And you know, if you don't have control to money or to economy, it becomes hard for any activity to move on. Come movement, come printing newspapers, come talking on radios, come whatever the method they used to claim for their freedom. If the funding is poor, then it cannot move on. So that was a big challenge. Then imprisonment of Africans or prominent Africans without trial. That was another big problem. They could not bother. So long as one came out as the person struggling for freeing his or her own country, it could be looked at by the whites as a threat, and therefore they could arrest and put in prison without following court procedures. Then interstate conflicts and civil wars was yet another problem that made these Africans who were struggling for their freedom to have a challenge, because those interstate conflicts could not allow the Africans to unite and discuss how best they would solve those problems. Then the political killings of core Pan-Africanists like Patrice Lumumba, whoever could come up strongly to fight against the whites, they could arrest and assassinate or kill. So they killed some of the upcoming and strong Pan-Africans like Patrice Lumumba. That one was a very big problem as regards to Pan-Africanism. Then, lack of common language. I told you, if one cannot understand one another in any case of maybe a meeting or one-on-one discussion or interaction, if there is no flow, feedback, understanding one another in communicating, then it becomes a big challenge. And that was as a result of different Pan-Africans coming from different African countries and from different ethnicities. Then the failure to form the United States of Africa. That one was a big challenge. It took them some time. It took them some time to form at least a union which would bring them together, or to form an organization that would bring them together. So that was a very big problem. Let us look at now the achievements of Pan-Africanism. What did they achieve? What did the Pan-Africans achieve when they were struggling to have their freedom? One, the movement promoted unity among Africans. The people had to come together because as they continued to educate other Africans about the values and the importance of that Pan-Africanism, so they had to make those people come together through all those sorts of mobilization, through the media, through the newspapers they could print. The people had to get knowledge about Pan-Africanism and they had to come together. Then it helped to teach Africans about their rights. Through newspapers, the Pan-Africans started, the people were able to access information to know their rights and fight to defend their rights. It helped to train high-quality African leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, like Julius Nyerere. All those came up as a result of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because they were able to acquire education as they were encouraged to, and they were able again to copy the leadership skills, and that one enabled them to come up as high quality African leaders. Then the movement of Pan-Africanism enabled the African countries to come together, and that one led to the formation of an organization called Organization of African Unity, which made these countries come together, especially those countries that could attain their independence, because that organization was meant to bring all independent countries in Africa together, and that organization was formed in 1963. It helped to reduce the rate of racial segregation or racism in South Africa. And candidates, you know, when we are teaching about foreign influence and we talked about apartheid in South Africa, that was fought against by one of the nationalists called Nelson Mandela, who was also a Pan-Africanist. Now, candidates, let us go to another subtopic, which is the weaknesses of Pan-Africanism. And this is number one. It failed to create the United States of Africa. It failed to create the United States of Africa. Then two, it failed to raise the standards of living in Africa. Then three, it failed to end human rights abuses in Africa. I said it failed to end human rights abuses in Africa. Then lastly, it failed to end neo-colonialism. Candidates, up to today, much as most African countries got their independence, but I want to let you know that there are some matters which they cannot decide on their own, whereby they need to involve the decisions from their former colonial masters. That is what we call neo-colonialism. But it is just indirect. But still, those countries are under colonialism, but which is indirect. That's what I'm saying. It failed to stop neo-colonialism. Candidates, we can also now go to countries in Africa that were not colonized. There are countries in Africa that defended their sovereignty, their independence, and they said these colonial masters would not take charge of us. So they maintained their independence, and they were majorly two. The first one is Liberia. And when we are looking at location of African countries on the map of Africa, we saw them in geography. And Liberia is one of those countries which is located in the western region of Africa. And its capital city, candidates, is Monrovia. Why it was not colonized? Why Liberia was not colonized? It was a home for freed slaves. During slave trade, we looked at slave trade in Africa, and we said that during that time, those slaves who could be freed, they could be taken to Liberia. And why? Because it had deployed what we call diplomacy. It had deployed diplomacy, and therefore it could give a room for those slaves to stay there. It had a historical alliance with USA. That one is in connection to diplomacy. The government of Liberia was able to relate positively or to have that kind of good relationship with the governments of United States of America. And another reason why it was not colonized is that USA had economic interests in setting rubber plantations in Liberia. Because Liberia is known for rubber growing, and those people had already developed interest that they would have those plantations established in Liberia. So that economic part of interest by the USA in Liberia made it to be not colonized or to be left free. Then another country I told you is Ethiopia. Why Ethiopia? We looked at when we are locating African countries on the map of Africa in geography, we looked at it as one of the countries in the whole of Africa. They are in the tip. They are in the tip. That's why we find Ethiopia. And its capital city is Addis Ababa, as we said. And it had great leaders who were famous, who tried to work hard and protect its sovereignty. These leaders were Emperor Menakil II and Emperor Haile Selassie. Those people were so great that they worked hard to defend the sovereignty of Ethiopia. And the candidates, you need also to note this, that there is one of the countries that tried to colonize it, but it failed, and that country was Italy. That country was Italy. It tried, and all in vain. While it was not colonized, it had strong leaders, and we have already mentioned some of them. The major two, it had strong and well-trained soldiers to defend or to protect its boundaries from external and internal attacks. It had strong support from Britain and France. Why? Because those countries had developed interest or had good relationship with it or with its government and the leaders, and therefore those were some of the superpower countries that supported Ethiopia, and therefore for that reason it was not colonized. Another reason was its terrain provided hiding places for soldiers. The terrain, I mean the landscape. The landscape, it was mountainous, and up to now it is. So the mountains could hinder the movement of those people who could come to try to colonize Ethiopia. It had poor transport due to being mountainous. It had poor transport due to being mountainous, and Candace, you know, it is very difficult to build a road in areas which have got mountains. And I want in your free time, you find out how best can people make transport easy in mountainous areas. That one you will find out. Then another reason is that it was considered economically poor. They did not mind about it, having realized that it was in the Horn of Africa, which is a semi-desert, which has very many mountains, so they did not consider it as sort of being productive. So they had to ignore. For that reason, it was not colonized. Its people were united to fight against their enemies. The people from Ethiopia, so long as they heard of anybody trying to come and sabotage or interfere with their peace, they could come together and see how best they would fight against such an attack. Then lastly, its political background gave birth to, gave pride to its people. I said its political background gave pride to its people. Then candidates, as we are winding up, I want you to look at the screen and attempt those questions. They are just revision questions from the so far covered work. Then when next time we meet in another lesson, we shall begin with those questions. Then later on, we build on to where we shall have stopped. I hope to meet you in the next lesson. Thank you very much for attending my lesson. God bless you.